An elderly lady came into the lobby of the church that morning and was greeted by an usher who helped her up the stairs. He said, "I'd like to help you find a seat. Do you know where you would like to sit?" She said, "Yes, I'd like to sit on the front row." He said, "I don't think that's such a good idea." "Why is that?" "Well," he said, it's our pastor. He really preaches boring sermons." She said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "No." She said, "I'm the pastor's mother." He said, "I see. Do you know who I am?" She said, "No." He said, "Good." A politician, a rather pompous one who was running for office, was by his handlers encouraged to go to the extended care facility. They told him they're a captive audience, they'll hear what you have to say, and you can secure their votes. He was not certain at all, thought maybe he ought to go somewhere else. No, this is the place you have to go, so he gave in and went. He went, he spoke, he shook hands, he kissed cheeks, he made the rounds and thought, well, maybe I have earned a few votes. He was on his way out of the lobby when he saw one elderly woman seated in a wheelchair, and he walked to her and in a very effusive manner shook her hand and said to her, "Do you know who I am?" She peered up at him for a long moment and said, "No, sir, I don't believe I do, but if you go over to that desk, they can tell you who you are." And then there was the class. Big class, public university, a lot of students. To the professor, they were just faces and numbers. He didn't know the students. He was rather strict, rather hard. When time rolled around for the final exam, his instructions were specific and clear. You will have 2 hours to write. I will give you warnings at 15, 10, and 5 minutes, and then I will tell you to turn in the exams. I will accept no exams late. They had their warning. Final exam time came. It was a tough class, and many of them, if not most, took the entire time to write the exam. 15 minutes left, 10, 5, turn in your exams. And they stood up almost as one and filed down to the front and piled a large stack of exams on his table. Everyone, that is, except for one. One student, right about there, stayed and just kept writing, seemingly unperturbed. The professor almost said something. He was already angry, but then the curiosity he felt got the better of him. He decided, I'm going to wait and see what happens. So he sat down, took the first exam, began to read through it, just watching out of the corner of his eye. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, 20, continued to write. Finally, after about 20 minutes passed, he slowly stood up, stretched, gave his exam the final once-over, picked up his books, and walked up to the front and was preparing to lay it down on the large stack of exams. And the professor looked up at him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm turning in my exam." He said, "Listen, you heard exactly what I said. I told the class I would accept no late exams. I'm sorry." Well, the student at first looked puzzled and then hurt and then frankly offended. He stepped back and stuck his chest out and said, "Do you know who I am?" The professor said, "Not only do I not know who you are, I don't care who you are." And the student said, "Well, fine then." Picked up about half the stack, put his in, dropped it, turned around, walked out of the room. Identity. Identity. The dictionary defines identity as the core reality of who we are. Identity. We sometimes have identity wrong. We mistake identity. We wonder about someone's identity. And truth be told, some of us spend a long time asking questions about our own identity. Who am I? Identity is a key part of what it means to be a human being. Have you noticed that there are certain people the which, when you are sure about their identity, it suddenly changes everything in terms of how you act and live and respond? You're speeding down Interstate 10, 80 miles an hour. You glance in the rearview mirror and suddenly realize the identity of the car behind you. It's black and white. Do you respond? You're at the checkout line, loading your groceries onto the counter. You're about to pay when you realize that the person just behind you in line is your family doctor. What parts of what you're buying do you suddenly try to cover up? You're in Barnes & Noble, you're in the DVD section, and suddenly your pastor walks in. Are you sure? Is it true that Billy Graham DVD that you suddenly grabbed is the one you came to buy? Identity. It's interesting what identity does. When we realize a person's identity, how we respond, how it affects us. There are some people the which, when you realize their identity, change everything for you. One such a figure was an itinerant teacher from a backwater town in Galilee. There came a point in his life and experience when he stood in a town called Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was known by the religions of the day. The religions of the day were very present there. The Roman religion, the Greek religion, even the Hebrew religion had some of pieces of what were important to them in Caesarea Philippi. It's a place that is rich in religion. Religion, if you will, is almost in the air. And this itinerant teacher from Nazareth stands up. He is standing there with all the religious greats of his day in mind and asks a question about his identity. The story is told in the Gospel of Mark. Mark, the 8th chapter. If you would turn there in your Bibles, if you're reaching for a pew Bible, it's page 1502. 1502. Allow me to set a bit of the context. Eugene Peterson says that the Gospel of Mark up to this point has unfolded certainly with some intensity, certainly with action, there's no question about that, but that there has also been a certain meandering, leisurely quality about it. Jesus goes to this town and then he goes to that town. He heals this person and then that person. He goes home to eat with pretty much anyone who will have him. He goes in the boat with his disciples on the lake. There is a sense, as you read the story up to this point in Mark, that he has all the time in the world. But then something happens. Here in these scenes, one of which we are about to read, something changes. Because after this, suddenly, the Gospel of Mark is filled with intensity and gravity and focus. After this, there are no more miracles. After this, he is headed straight to Jerusalem. He has an appointment, a date with destiny at a place called Calvary. After what we will read today, his life, his mind, his words become increasingly focused on his death. So what we will read today is that point of watershed. Suddenly there's a change. It's the bend in the road, if you will. So what is it that happens at that place? What is it that is so important that scholars will say it's the pinnacle of this gospel? Well, let's read it. Mark, the 8th chapter, we will begin reading in verse 27. Here's what Mark writes. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Who do the people say that I am? What do they think? What do they believe about my identity? Now, there are a number of ways in which Jesus could have asked that question. He could have asked it out of simple curiosity. He could have said, hey, Twitter's going mad. They're tweeting all over the place about me. I know they're talking. I want to know, what are they saying? So can you tell me, what do they say about who I am? Or he could have asked it out of interest in his reputation. I know the people out there on the street are telling stories about me. I don't want them to tarnish my reputation. So tell me, who do they think I am? What are they saying about me? He could have asked the question, as some politicians might, trying to test the waters, trying to see whether or not it's an appropriate time to throw his or her hat into the ring. So what's the word on the street? What do you think? Is it a good time? Is it going well? He could have asked it in all those ways. Or he could have asked it in this way. He could have asked, what is it that they're saying about me? What do they understand and believe about my identity? He could have said that in the interest of knowing whether or not they were understanding the truth about him. Are they coming closer to understanding who I really am? Are they getting closer to knowing my true identity? Jesus is interested in knowing whether or not they understand his identity, because he happens to be one of those people the which, when you identify them, when you know who they are, everything in you changes. And so he asks, what about it? Who do the people say I am? Now that's a question which has continued to echo and reverberate all down through the centuries since the very time Jesus asked it. We continue to ask, who is this man? Who was this man called Jesus of Nazareth? Back in about the mid-90s, Philip Yancey was writing his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, a fine volume. Let me read you some descriptions of Yancey as he began to wrestle with the issue of that book. Yancey writes, how do we answer the simple question, who was Jesus? Secular history gives us few clues. In a delicious irony, the figure who has changed history more than any other managed to escape the attention of most scholars and historians of his own time. Even the four men who wrote the Gospels omitted much that would interest modern readers, skipping over 9/10 of his life. Since none devotes a word to physical description, we know nothing about Jesus' shape or stature or eye color. Details of his family life are so scant that scholars still debate whether or not he had brothers and sisters. The facts of biography considered essential to modern readers simply did not concern the gospel writers. In other words, the things which interest you and me when we sit down to read a biography are largely ignored in the gospel accounts. What did the person look like? Tall, short, skinny, fat? What kind of complexion? What eye color? What kind of intensity was there about their look? Their demeanor? None of those things. Personal details. What were their growing up years like? What made them decide to go into the profession they entered? None of those questions are addressed. Who was Jesus? Yancey continues, before beginning this book, I spent several months in 3 seminary libraries, one Catholic, one liberal Protestant, one conservative evangelical. I spent the time reading about Jesus. It was daunting in the extreme to walk in that first day and see not just shelves, but entire walls of books devoted to Jesus. One scholar at the University of Chicago estimates that more has been written about Jesus in the last 20 years than in the previous 19 centuries. I felt, says Yancey, almost as if the hyperbolic comment at the end of John's gospel had come true. Jesus did many other things as well, said John. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. How's that translated? People are very interested in Jesus. Who was he? Who is he? Yancey concludes, if you peruse the academic books available at a seminary bookstore, you may encounter Jesus as a political revolutionary, as a magician who married Mary Magdalene, as a Galilean charismatic, a rabbi, a peasant Jewish cynic, a Pharisee, an anti-Pharisee Essene, an eschatological prophet, a hippie in a whirl of Augustan yuppies, and as the hallucinogenic leader of a sacred mushroom cult. Serious scholars write these works with little sign of embarrassment. At the core is the question, who was he? Who do people say that he was? In fact, according to a journal entitled Vital Ministry, around the turn of this last millennium, they estimated that there had been written over time approximately 66,000 books about Jesus of Nazareth. Back in the years when I was teaching full-time with the School of Religion here at Loma Linda University, I had the privilege of annually attending the scholars meeting at different parts of the country. One of my favorite parts of the meeting was to go into the room, the massive room at the convention center where it would be held, and go through all of the dozens and dozens and dozens of book displays from publishers all over the country and even around the world. Those who were providing religion curriculum to all kinds of universities. One of the things that struck me over and again as I would go through those displays and peruse the volumes and see what was being published was that year after year after year, more and more and more books were being published on Jesus of Nazareth. Who is he? Who was he? That, in a sense, is the essence of the question Jesus asks when he looks at his disciples. Who do the people say that I am? This is a slice of the people of the land right here in front of Jesus. You would not confuse these at all with any theological society. There's not a Barth, not a Bruner, not a Bultmann, not a Bonhoeffer in the bunch. Just disciples. But they know what the people are saying. So Jesus turns to them and says, who do the people say that I am? And they answer, well, Jesus, truth be told, they're not quite sure. They think maybe John the Baptist, maybe Elijah, or maybe one of the prophets. Bottom line, Jesus, they're not entirely sure who you are, but they think you're great. You must be one of the great prophets to have spoken for God. You must have come with a message direct from God. But as we read the account, it quickly becomes clear that Jesus is not satisfied with that answer. And that points out a very distinct difference between Jesus and me, and possibly between Jesus and you. I have noticed for me that I often am more concerned about reputation than I am with the truth about me being known. Have you discovered that? It's much easier to take out and to polish the reputation than it is to put on full display my identity. This is who I am. This is what I stand for. With Jesus, no such thing. He says, I don't care how great my reputation is or what they think about me in terms of greatness from a human perspective, because the truth is, you don't compliment God by calling him a great man. So it's as though with one swipe of his hand, he wipes away what all the people are saying, all the reputation he's built, all the uncertainty they express, and then he turns his soul-searching eyes upon the disciples themselves. In the original, he uses a double emphasis with the pronoun. And you, who do you say that I am? It's inescapable. He is pressing home his query upon them. Who do you say that I am? Enter Peter. Blustering, blundering Peter. Foot in your mouth, Peter. Always answering questions that aren't being asked, Peter. Enter Peter. And for all of the times that he may have missed the mark, this is one point in time when Peter, speaking for the disciples, hits the bullseye. He says to Jesus, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the one anointed by God. If we read the account over in Matthew's Gospel from which our scripture reading today came, Matthew elaborates on what Peter says. He says that Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Wow, Peter. How did you see that? How did you detect that? After all, what you have in front of you is a dusty, careworn traveling preacher. Sure, there are evidences of other great religions around you, but here you have him and a motley crew of followers. How is it that you possibly could look at him and say with such stunning clarity, "You are the Christ of God"? Well, maybe part of our answer comes in the context, because there is a story that immediately precedes this one, which we have to notice. We go back to Mark, the 8th chapter. It is one of the strangest stories in all of the Gospels. In fact, it's the only time in the entire Gospel narrative where Jesus has to do something twice to heal one person. Let's read it. Mark, the 8th chapter, this time beginning in verse 22. Mark says, "They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, 'Do you see anything?' He looked up and said, 'I see people. They look like trees walking around.' Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home saying, 'Don't even go into the village.'" Is it just me, or is that a strange story? They bring the man to Jesus. He can't see. "Can you help him?" Jesus spits on him. He touches his eyes. He says, "Okay, can you see?" And the man squints and looks around. He says, "Well, I see these big blobs like bushes or trees. They're moving around. I can't see very clearly. Can't see very well at all." So Jesus has another go at it. Puts his hands on him again, touches him again. Then he says, "How about now? Can you see now?" And the man looks around and he says, "Whoa, now I can see clearly." And then Jesus says to him, "Now go on home. Don't talk to anyone on the way. Just go on home, straight home." Is that strange to you? I mean, can you imagine getting an email telling you the story of somebody being healed, and then in bold letters at the bottom of the email it says, "Do not forward this email"? That's essentially what Jesus said. What is happening? Well, if we go over to Matthew's gospel and read the same account, Matthew tells us something that Jesus said that Mark leaves out. After Peter has said, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus says to Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of John, because flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. The one who revealed that to you was my Father in heaven." That, in other words, was not something that came from your humanity, the ability to see me as the Messiah. That came from God. Mark doesn't tell us that. But what Mark does do is tell us a story. An acted out parable, if you will. Some have pointed out the very clear parallels between these two incidents we have just read. There are 4 elements in each of them. First element is the circumstances or the setting. First story, they bring a blind man to Jesus. "Can you heal him?" They're in Bethsaida. Second story, they're in Caesarea Philippi. Jesus is surrounded by people who don't see clearly. Second element of each story is partial resolution. In the first story, spits, touches, "Can you see?" "Well, I can see, but not very clearly." Second story, "Who do the people say that I am?" "Oh, they believe you are our messenger from God." But beyond that, they're not sure. They're not very clear. Third element in each story, first story, touches him again. "Can you see now?" He says, "Oh, I see clearly." Second story, "But you, who do you say that I am?" "Simon Peter, you are the Messiah of God." Crystal clear clarity. Fourth element, first story, go straight home. Second story, don't tell anyone. Very clear parallels. You see, for the man born blind, that first touch allowed him to see some vague outlines. I can see, but not very clearly. But that second touch opened his eyes to the degree that he could see things as they really are. Could Mark be telling us, pay attention to this story, because in the next story, there is no way anyone, Simon Peter included, would ever be able to see with clarity who Jesus is without the touch of the divine hand, which Matthew describes in the words, "Blessed are you, Simon. Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father who is in heaven." How did Peter know? A second touch, if you will, which he would need. Why? Well, it's because of that last thing that Jesus said. Shh, don't tell anyone. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine coming to a worship service and having a very moving, a very powerful experience? God touches you in some way. You are lifted up, elevated by the music and the story and the word and the scripture. All of it moves you profoundly. You are filled with joy. And then in the benediction, the pastor stands up and says, "Shh, don't tell anyone. Whatever you do this week, do not tell people what happened here. Shh, keep it between us." Can you imagine? And yet, isn't that what Jesus did? It's called by scholars the messianic secret. It's not the only time he does it. He goes around the country doing these great things and then says, "Shh, shh, shh, just between us." And you say, what's going on? Well, maybe the clue to what's going on is what comes next. Because no sooner does Jesus finish talking to Peter and hearing Peter's declaration, "You are the Messiah of God," than the text says Jesus, for the first time, predicts his death. "I'm going to Jerusalem, they're going to kill me." Next thing he does, he says, "Any of you who want to follow me and be my disciples, take up your cross and follow me." The next chapter, he predicts his death again. The next chapter, he predicts it again. After this moment, his focus is specifically on Jerusalem and Calvary. So could it be that what Jesus is saying to people is, don't go out and proclaim it hither and yon that I am the Messiah. Because when people hear that word Messiah, they will have a very distinct image that comes to mind, and that is not what I am about. Let the whole story play itself out so that they can see the true identity of God's Messiah. And when they see that identity, then they will have to decide whether or not they can affirm that I am the one sent by God. Because Jesus happens to be one of those people to which, when you understand his identity, it changes everything for you. He says here very clearly, if you would accept me as Messiah and be my disciple, it will cost you everything. It will turn your world upside down. Is there good news? There is. Because the story after that is the story of the transfiguration. Jesus seen in glory, talking to Moses and Elijah, a vision of the kingdom to come. No wonder Mark's gospel makes a turn here. But the question continues to resonate, to reverberate, and to re-echo. Who do you say that Jesus is? Lee Strobel was a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. Spent a number of years in journalism, had a degree in journalism, worked hard with that, was an agnostic. But asked to do a story on a large church called Willow Creek Community Church, he began attending the church to gather information for the story and was ultimately converted. So deeply was this change in his life realized that he decided, I want to see if I can work in pastoral ministry, which he did for a number of years. But then he ultimately reverted back to his writing, to his journalism. About 10, 11 years ago, he wrote a book called The Case for Faith. It was from a journalist perspective, asking the key questions, interviewing the key people who might be able to explain to him how to build a sound foundation for one's faith. One of the people he interviewed for that book was a gentleman named Charles Templeton. Charles Templeton was a contemporary of Billy Graham. Billy Graham and Charles Templeton were not only friends, but they were soulmates in a sense. They both shared the same belief in Jesus. But after a period of time passed, Templeton ultimately turned away from that and finally said, I do not believe any longer that he is the Messiah, that he is God in the flesh. And he turned away from his faith. Strobel, in writing his book, said, I need to interview Templeton, who by that point in time was a rather elderly gentleman. I would like to share with you a part of that interview, and I'd like you to hear it in Strobel's own words. Here's what Strobel writes. And so how do you assess this Jesus, I asked. It seemed like the next logical question, but I wasn't ready for the response it would evoke. Templeton's body language softened. It was as if he suddenly felt relaxed and comfortable in talking about an old and dear friend. His voice, which at times had displayed such a sharp and insistent edge, now took on a melancholy and reflective tone. His guard seemingly down, he spoke in an unhurried pace, almost nostalgically, carefully choosing his words as he talked about Jesus. He was, said Templeton, he was the greatest human being who has ever lived. He was a moral genius. His ethical sense was unique. He was the intrinsically wisest person that I have ever confronted in my life or my readings. His commitment was total and led to his own death, to the ultimate detriment of the world. What could one say about him except that this was a form of true greatness? I was taken aback, says Strobel. You sound like you really care about him, I said. Well, yes. He's the most important thing in my life, came his reply. He stuttered, searching for the right word. I know it may sound strange, but I have to say, I adore him. I wasn't sure how to respond. You say that with some emotion, I said. Well, yes. Everything good I know, everything decent I know, everything pure I know, I learned from Jesus. And tough? Yes. Just look at Jesus. He castigated people. He was angry. People don't think of him that way, but they don't read the Bible. He had a righteous anger. He cared for the oppressed and exploited. There's no question that he had the highest moral standard, the least duplicity, the greatest compassion of any human being in history. There have been many other wonderful people, but Jesus is Jesus. And I asked, and so the world would do well to emulate him? Oh my goodness, yes, I have tried and tries as far as I can go to act as if I believed he would act. That doesn't mean I could read his mind, because one of the most fascinating things about him was that he often did the exact opposite of what you'd expect. And then abruptly, Templeton cut short his thoughts. There was a brief pause, almost as if he was uncertain as to whether or not he should continue. But no, he said slowly, he's the most... He stopped, then started again. In my view, he's the most important human being who has ever existed. That's when Templeton uttered the words I never expected to hear from him. And if I may put it this way, he said, as his voice began to crack, I miss him. With that, tears flooded his eyes. He turned his head and looked downward, raising his left hand to shield his face from me. His shoulders bobbed as he wept. What was going on? Was this an unguarded glimpse into his soul? I felt drawn to him and wanted to comfort him. At the same time, the journalist in me wanted to dig to the core of what was prompting this reaction. Missed him why? Missed him how? In a gentle voice, I asked, in what way? Templeton fought to compose himself. I could tell it wasn't like him to lose control in front of a stranger. He sighed deeply and wiped away a tear. After a few more awkward moments, he waved his hand dismissively. Finally, quietly but adamantly, he insisted, enough of that. I miss him. Who is Jesus to you? It's a question you cannot escape. It's a question that continues to echo in Loma Linda all the way from Caesarea Philippi. There are some people who, when you answer that question about their identity, change everything for you. And Jesus is one of those. Who is he to you? Could be that you will answer the question as Templeton did, as the people who surrounded Jesus did. Oh, he's a great man. Must be one of the greatest of the prophets. He has no moral equal. He has no ethical peer. He is at the top, at the pinnacle when it comes to human achievement. But that's all you see. And Jesus remains cloudy, indistinct, like a tree walking around. Or it could be that you would answer the question the way Peter did. Peter, who stood, who had been touched by the divine hand, who had a clarity of vision that is stunning in its scope, to be able to stand surrounded by evidences of other religions in a dusty town and look at an itinerant preacher and say to him, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." I don't know how you have answered that question. And I don't know how you will answer that question. But I can tell you this. The way you answer that question will change everything for you. You will either end up saying, with tear-streaked cheeks, "I miss him." Or you will hear words of gracious joy. "Come to me, child. Welcome home." So it's your time. The question is yours and you. Who do you think Jesus is?
Thank you for watching the Discover channel. This channel's primary focus is to share uplifting and enriching spiritual content with people of all backgrounds of life. These presentations will enhance and develop you intellectually so that you can make informed decisions that will assist you in your day-to-day life. Our goal is to bring hope to the viewers and encourage them. Should you share this vision, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your family and friends so that they too can benefit from this content. We have a Patreon account should you wish to support this channel so that we can produce more of this content. Books and merchandise will also become available as the channel grows. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you at the next one.